Okay, I'm sure the listeners know by now, but obviously I live in Australia, and Australia means very big bugs and just like things that
Mm.
are in the bush. Let me tell you a story that happened to me the other day, Liv. So I was at
Oh,
a gig with my friends, and one of my friends got a little bit too drunk, so we had to go outside and just like chill there for a bit, so like
bit
she
of
felt a
fresh
bit
air.
better. Anyway, I was sat outside on this bench and I was just like sat next to her having conversation, and I just see this like silhouette and feel this thing on my arm, and I looked
Mm.
down and I just see this massive spider like
No,
walking down my arm.
no.
And I literally, bear in mind as well, like given the context, my friend isn't feeling very well, so I'm like trying to be there for her, but I literally stand up and start screaming. I'm like literally in the middle of this gig and I'm like swiping this massive spider on my arm.
Absolutely the
And
fuck
then
not.
obviously like as soon as I swiped it off my arm, it was like attached to the other hand with the web. And I was literally like, ah! And
Oh
I
my
had
God,
to like grab the
no.
web and like
No.
fling it away, and I was
That's disgusting.
literally so scarred. It was honestly like some Spider-Man shit. Like I've never experienced.
Oh,
Like it was horrible. It was literally crawling down my arm, and it was freaking huge. Luckily, I was a bit drunk, so I was like even like a bit less stressed than I would have been if I was sober. But like it was horrible.
yeah, no, absolutely not. I don't even mind spiders, but crawling on
Nah, I
me,
hate them.
yeah, no. No.
I hate spiders. Like we've had this conversation before where there's been like a cockroach in my flat and you've literally
Oh,
recoiled.
oh my
But I
God.
don't mind cockroaches as
Oh, no,
much
no,
as
no.
spiders. I think spiders are horrible.
Yeah, but cockroaches are like disease ridden, I feel, and has actually question for you on the cockroach front. You've
Yeah.
obviously been traveling across like Southeast Asia and stuff. Have you ever eaten, like, they've got like all of the insects on the market where you can like go and buy
Mm.
them and eat them. Have you eaten them? Because I
I've
have.
not eaten a cockroach, no.
I've
But
not eaten a cockroach
Kieran's
because,
eaten a scorpion.
and what was it like?
I don't know. I didn't eat it myself. He didn't seem to like it very much. But actually, the only reason I didn't eat it is because the vendor guy who was like handing out the scorpions was like picking his nose 2 minutes before. So I
Oh,
was
for
just like,
God's
I
sake.
don't really want
This
to
is
eat the
disgusting.
scorpion now.
This is disgusting. I did eat, me and my sister wanted to do like a little I'm a celeb challenge. So we bought like all of the insects and we filmed ourselves eating them. But this is when we were like
Mm.
younger, which is going to make what I'm about to say worse because I think we were like 14, 15, but we were really drunk. Um,
Oh,
and
classic.
I mean, that's a classic Brit experience. If you're not a Brit listening to this thinking, why on earth are they drunk at 14, 15? It's a universal Brit experience, okay? But yeah, I did throw up, and I don't know to this day if it was because I was drunk or because of the insects or a combination of both. But anyway, it was pretty disgusting. I'd love to say that we're going to stop talking about disgusting stuff, but actually today's episode is we're going to be continuing this conversation about insects. So yeah, let's get
Great.
into today's topic. Welcome to the So Cultured podcast.
Where we explore science and tech unfiltered.
We're your hosts, Liv and Taz, two girls who love STEM and spilling the tea.
Each season, we take on a new theme, whether it's busting conspiracy theories, celebrating women in STEM, or breaking down the science in your favourite sci-fi films.
And of course, in every episode, we spill the laboratory,
where we share your wildest stories from the world of science.
Let's get into this week's episode of So Cultured. What if all insects disappeared? Imagine waking up tomorrow and every insect on Earth has just gone. Honestly, I can't lie. At first, I think I would personally be thrilled. Like, imagine there's no mosquito buzzing in your ear when you're trying to sleep. You could sit outside with an ice cold Aperol spritz and not have a wasp trying to dive bomb into your drink. And opening a window in summer no longer feels like some kind of risky decision. If you know, you know. If you're someone
Hmm.
who finds insects disgusting, which I absolutely am, as we just discovered in the intro, it would genuinely feel like we had just won at life.
Look, I know, like I've said, like living in Australia, there's bugs and stuff, but honestly, as a kid, I have always found insects really fascinating. Like, I know this sounds really sadistic, but I used to try and catch bumblebees in plastic bags.
Why in bags?
Plastic bags, yeah.
Why on earth would you try and catch them in a plastic bag?
I don't really know. I thought it was like quite fun to hear them like buzz on the bag.
Oh, you're evil.
Yeah, I didn't think it was really evil at the time, but I also used to like collect ladybirds and like put them in a Tupperware box and like just have them like as pets.
What the fuck is it with you and putting things in Tupperware boxes?
What do you mean?
Bats in Tupperware
Oh,
boxes, ladybirds in Tupperware boxes, bees in plastic bags. She's evil. Who the hell am I doing this podcast
and I
for?
used to like I'm really exposing myself here. I used to put. Well, I once saw in the Guinness Book of Records some girl won the Guinness Book of Records for the amount of snails she could put on her face. So then I was like,
Oh
I
my
could do
god.
that. And I went outside, and I actually didn't put them on my face. I balanced, like, saw how many I could put on my arm because like the face was just a little bit too
No,
far from me. But yeah. So
that's
yeah,
evil.
clearly I was just an outdoorsy girly back in the day,
If
but
that's what you
I
want to call
mean,
it, Daz, we can go with that.
spiders
Sure.
is where I actually draw the line. Actually, oh my god! I tell you another sadistic thing I used to do. I used to get ants and throw them into spider's web, and then watch the spider like wrap it up.
That one I can allow because it's like it's a general curiosity. It's
Out of all of them, you
interested in the
allow that
science
one.
about how
That's probably the
webs
most
work.
sadistic one.
Ugh. Oh, maybe because I used to do something similar.
Okay.
No, we're evil. We're evil. When you're a kid,
Oh
though,
god.
like genuinely, when you're a kid, especially I feel like our generation, we weren't really
Mhm.
taught this kind of thing. Do you know what I
No.
mean? Anyway, honestly, a
Yeah.
world without insects, to me, it sounds like a dream. But it is also the kind of dream that could turn into a nightmare very, very quickly. But I think before we even ask what would happen if insects disappeared, we need to start with a much more basic question, which is what insects are actually doing here in the first place. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying, listen, I picked this topic and I was like, right, we haven't done an episode on insects. I kind of find it low key a bit boring, but I'm going to do it anyway. But let me just say, this is more interesting than you think it's going to be. So stick around, give me a chance because I found out a lot of interesting information.
We did
But
actually, I'm gonna fact check you there, Liv. We
cicadas,
did
I know,
actually do an
cicadas,
interesting episode on what are they
cicadas,
called again?
cicadas.
Cicadas.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that
that
was
was a
like
good
pretty
episode.
wild.
That was
Yeah.
yeah, that was really interesting. So you can go and listen to that as well if you do like insects. But anyway, what we were going to talk about what insects are actually doing here in the first place because most of us only really notice insects when they are actively irritating us, like when they're buzzing in our ear or something. But biologically, insects are not some tiny side category of life that the planet could just shrug off losing. Around 1 million insect species have already formally been described by science, and current estimates suggest that the real number could actually be closer to 5.5 million.
Mm.
So, when we say insects, we are talking about one of the most diverse group of animals on Earth, not just a few annoying little creatures buzzing around our house. And I think what makes this question especially interesting is that the insects people usually hate the most are often the ones that we assume must be completely pointless. And I think flies are a great example of this because I always
Mm.
hear people say that flies are the most pointless things on Earth. And honestly, I'm not going to lie, I kind of get it because like you've probably heard people say that they just like when for example they come and land on your food, rub their weird little hands together, throw up on
Oh
your food,
yeah.
and then they just fly away. Like, have you heard that like flies
Ew.
throw up every time they land on something? Do you know that?
No, I did not know that. That's
And
traumatizing.
and then of course there are maggots, which I personally think are
Oh.
one of the most disgusting things in nature. But that is actually a very narrow way of looking at flies because ecologically they are doing a lot more than people realize because flies are major pollinators. And when researchers looked across global food crops that benefit from animal pollination, Insects other than bees turned up as important visitors and pollinators again and again, with flies actually being one
Mm.
of the key groups in that story. So, pollination is not just a bee story, flies are a really big part of it too. Now, they are also part of what keeps dead things from sitting there for ages. So, when scientists talk about flies being decomposers, what they mean is that these insects help break down dead organic matter and recycle nutrients back into the ecosystem. And blowflies are one of the clearest examples of this. So, say a fox dies in woodland or like a rat dies in an alleyway. By the way, I feel like this episode is going to kind of like give people the heebie-jeebies, but stay with me, please.
Mm.
Blowflies can actually detect the carcass extremely quickly and are often the very first insects to arrive. So the adults will lay eggs on the body, usually around like openings or wounds, and then the your face, the eggs will hatch into larvae, and those larvae feed on the soft tissue. Now I know that sounds disgusting, and Taz, I can tell from you're even like scratching your neck because I think you're getting the heebie-jeebies. I know it sounds
Yeah, that was
disgusting.
involuntary.
Because it is, but it is also a really important part of decomposition because they're helping move that dead body back into the ecosystem instead of just leaving it there as static waste. So even what
Mm.
most people think as one of the most pointless group of insects on earth is actually doing real ecological work.
Yeah, I did know that that was like a bit of a factor in insects, specifically flies, because obviously, I don't know, like anyone's left like maybe some food out for a bit too long. Oh my God, no, I'll tell you this really horrible
Oh
story
no.
once. I went
Oh no.
Why do I have so many stories about
I was literally
insects?
about to
This
say,
is
why do you have so many insect
really
stories?
really weird. But basically, when I was at uni, I went home for like a few weeks over the holidays. I came back and there was one housemate that had been there the whole time, but they happened to not be there when I came home to like my house share. And there were literally like 4 bin bags in the kitchen.
No.
And I was literally like, firstly, why is it stinking here? It was at the height of summer as well. Secondly,
No.
I'm like, why are there 4 full bin bags in the kitchen? So then I went to go take them out, lifted up the bag, and I'm not joking, there was like a
No.
100 maggots underneath
No.
all of these bin bags.
What
And
do you
I
even
was just
do?
like,
How do you even begin to tackle that?
I can't remember what I did, to be honest. I
I
think
would
I
not
literally
actually know
said
what
to
to
the
do.
guy, I was like, you're clearing that up because you've left that there. I'm
A
not fucking
hundred
touching
percent.
maggots. But yeah, like obviously relating back to the episode, I obviously knew like they have some
I'm itching my neck now.
role in role in like dead matter and like turning waste over, and I guess
Mhm.
like carcasses and stuff over and returning nutrients back to the soil. So yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So they are disgusting, but they're doing something. They're doing something. And ants are actually another really brilliant example of that because ants are so familiar that people almost stop seeing them, but they are literally everywhere all the time. Like they're in the cracks of the pavement, under stones. I feel like we all know this because as kids, when you were out playing in the garden, you just find them all the time. But when scientists tried to estimate how many ants there are on Earth, the number that they came up with was about 20 quadrillion. So their
What?
total biomass was estimated to be greater than the combined biomass of all wild birds and wild mammals put together. And that is just such a ridiculous number that it almost doesn't sound real. But it does tell you something really important. The ants are not just common, they are actually one of the most dominant forms of animal life on land. And once you start looking at what ants are actually doing, that starts to make a lot of sense because they are constantly moving material through ecosystems. They also prey on other invertebrates and are themselves prey for other animals. So they are woven into food webs from multiple directions at once. What are you laughing at?
This is making me feel less bad about throwing one singular ant into a spider's web because there's
You were
literally
just
like
feeding the
quadrillion
spider.
of them.
You know what I mean? You were feeding the spider. But this is what I mean though when I say that insects are really doing invisible labor because you don't really notice, but it is happening everywhere. But we've spoken about flies and ants, and these are like the typical kind of insects that we think about when we think about insects, and they're just like the boring ones, right? But the more we look into the insect world, the weirder it gets. And you can kind of see why people end up becoming a little bit obsessed with insects, because they're actually quite interesting. And one of my favorites that I wanted to tell you about was the jewel wasp, because this thing does something that sounds like something straight out of a science fiction novel. Because the jewel wasp is a metallic blue-green parasitoid wasp, and the adult only lives for a matter of weeks. But in that time, it carries out one of the creepiest life cycles in the animal kingdom. So, this particular wasp targets cockroaches, especially the American cockroach, and it doesn't just sting them and kill them, it actually injects venom directly into the regions of the cockroach's nervous system in a way that changes its behavior. The cockroach, once it's stung, is actually still alive and it can still move, but its drive to initiate walking is massively suppressed. So it's almost like a zombie. And we did actually speak about this on the cicada episode. I can't remember if we spoke about cockroaches or maybe it was cicadas, because I think a similar thing happens with cicadas,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So essentially, the wasp just like takes over the cockroach and turns it like into a zombie, and then just like uses its body. It's insane. But the wasp can also lead the cockroach back to a burrow by the antenna, lay an egg on it, and then when the larva hatches, it uses the living cockroach as food. And it is one of the clearest examples we have of an insect using highly targeted neurochemical manipulation to control another animal.
Yeah, that is crazy. Like, don't you think that like evolution that's kind of driving that is crazy? Like, it's not just like overpowering the cockroach and like embedding a like larvae into it. It's literally using some sort of venom to manipulate behavior. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's literally insane. And I have to tell you about another really interesting example, which is, I don't know if you've heard of this before, but it's called the bombardier beetle, which has one of the craziest defense systems in the animal kingdom. Now, these beetles are found in several parts of the world, including Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. And although different species vary in color, many are dark beetles with orange or reddish markings that you would probably never guess were carrying out literal chemistry experiments inside their own bodies. So they have paired defensive glands in the abdomen, which have basically like storage reservoirs and reaction chambers. Now, in the reservoirs, they keep chemicals, including hydroquinones and hydrogen peroxide, separated. Then, when they are threatened, these chemicals are pushed into the reaction chamber where enzymes help drive a rapid exothermic reaction. And this produces
Mm.
a hot, irritating spray, which the beetle can then fire impulses at predators. So, one insect is effectively hijacking another animal's behavior with neuroactive venom, and another is carrying out controlled chemical reactions literally inside its abdomen as a defense mechanism. And after I found out about this, and by the way, I looked at so many interesting examples. So I just picked the two that I really liked, but there are so many other interesting examples. But I low-key now feel like insects are underestimated, because there's not just a load of them, but they can actually do some really interesting things. And once you realize that, the bigger point starts to come into focus, because insects are not important because a few of them are cute, or because bees make honey. By the way, I think bees are the only ones that are cute, or because butterflies look nice in documentaries. They are important because taken together, they are doing an enormous amount of invisible labor that really keeps our ecosystems functioning.
Yeah, that is crazy, especially from like an evolutionary perspective as well, which is something we always talk about on this channel. But obviously we've spoken about how useful they are in general. Let's get to the crux of the episode. What would actually happen if insects disappeared?
Yeah, so many things would happen. But the first thing to say is that we've already established that loads of animals depend on insects. So they're a really important part of food chains, but they do not all depend on them in the same way. So for some species, insects are a constant food source, but for others, they are absolutely critical at one very specific point in the life cycle. So a lot of birds cannot make do with just any random food lying around when they are breeding. Their chicks need prey that is soft, protein rich, easy to digest, and available in huge numbers over a very short period of time. And a really good example of that is the pied flycatcher. Now, this is a tiny migratory bird that that spends the non-breeding season in West Africa, and then it travels thousands of miles north to Europe to breed. I just think, by the way, like the way birds migrate these crazy distances is very, very interesting, and I would love to do an episode on it at some point. And that's very nerdy of me to say, but I would, because I just think the journey is very impressive, but it is actually well timed. So the whole point is to arrive when spring is exploding with caterpillars and other insects, because that's what the chicks need. And there is a huge body of work on something called phenological mismatch, which is basically when the timing of one biological event shifts away from the timing of another. So if the birds arrive and breed, but the peak in insect abundance has already passed, or insect numbers are simply much lower than they should be, or let's say, what if they all disappeared? Then the adults may still be there, the nest may still be there, and the eggs may still hatch, but there is not enough of the right food at the right moment to raise healthy chicks. And that story isn't just true for pied flycatchers. You'll also see similar problems across migratory and insect eating birds more broadly.
That's so interesting. I never really thought about like the timings of their migration and how that relates to the abundance of insects. And obviously, if like insects disappeared completely, then it wouldn't necessarily affect the adult birds right away, but it would affect the fact that the young birds aren't able to like eat enough to
Mm.
survive. Yeah, I've never really considered that a factor. I mean, obviously, like food supply and stuff like that, it makes sense, but I never really thought about it in that way.
Yeah, 100%. But you can see it really clearly also in like aerial insectivores, which are birds that basically make a living out of like catching insects in flight. So this will be things like swifts, swallows, martins, and species like tree swallows. I found out a lot about birds, by the way, through doing this research. I had a friend who was like obsessed with birds, and like we'd be driving and she'd just like point them, like she'd just be like, "Oh my God, there's a,"
Really?
yeah. And I was like, "How do you get to that point in life?" But maybe that could be me. But anyway,
Usually when you're like 50, that happens. Not our age,
yeah.
but fair.
Well, we're not friends anymore, so.
Oh.
Anyway, so yeah, their whole ecology is built around the availability of airborne insects. And one really striking study published in 2019 showed that rainy springs were linked to poor nestling growth in tree swallows because the bad weather reduced access to these flying insects. And that is just from temporary weather driven drops in insect availability. So if we're imagining a world where insects disappear completely, then for birds like that, that is not just like a difficult year or a bad spring. It would just be the complete collapse of the entire feeding strategy that is used to raise the young.
Also, the thought of like birds flying to catch insects remind me of bats because obviously, like insectivorous bats do the same thing. So surely it would affect bats as well.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, essentially, like all of these species would be hit hard. Number one, by the fact that obviously there would be like fewer healthy offspring, but then eventually, obviously, yes, the whole food chain would be affected, and these like all of these different species basically could essentially lose like a huge part of their food source, I guess.
So, if we were to talk about humans, how would this then affect humans? Because I'm assuming it would have like it would be a knock-on effect from all of these other species being affected and then obviously us being affected as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess like one of the biggest ways we would notice it is through obviously our food. Not in the sense that like all of our food would vanish overnight, because that isn't really what would happen. I mean, eventually, total possibility that that could happen. But initially, it would just kind of be in a sense that a large amount of the food that people enjoy and rely on for like variety, nutrition, and quality actually really depends on insect pollination. So bees get all the credit here, and fair enough, because they are incredibly important, but they are not doing this alone because, like I said, flies, butterflies, moths, even beetles and wasps all contribute as well. And according to the FAO, about 75% of global food crop types depend at least partly on pollinators. Now that doesn't mean that 75% of like calories disappear, for example, because crops like wheat, rice, and maize are mostly wind pollinated, but it does mean that a lot of
Mm.
fruit, nuts, seeds, and vegetables become a lot more vulnerable. Coffee and cocoa are also both vulnerable to pollinator loss. So my main conclusion here was that if you are a fan of dairy milk, fruit, and nut, you are quite
Oh my
frankly
god.
fucked.
That's so weird you say that because literally look what I've got.
No, there's no way there's no way. Who on earth? I was literally thinking when I wrote this, who on earth eats dairy milk, fruit, and nut? And here you are with dairy milk, fruit, and nut.
I clearly value all the insects, don't I? Jesus.
Oh my God, I can't believe you eat dairy milk, fruit, and nut, to be honest.
Oh, it's
Like,
so good. It's not
no, it's
like my
not.
go-to, but I have to be in a specific mood for it, but I do really like it.
Oh my God, I don't know how to view you, to be honest. This is throwing me
An
off.
old lady.
Yeah, honestly, that's actually
Uh,
you are a fruit and nut eater because I just didn't have you down as a fruit and nut eater, and I don't think
it's
I think
good.
you're the like first person I know who eats it.
Really? Do you not
Yeah.
like it?
I mean, it's not that I don't like it, but it's like out of all the options you could choose, why are we choosing fruit and nut?
You know, I just think sometimes you want not something that's like don't get me wrong, I love like a dairy milk Oreo or like caramel or something. But sometimes I'm like, I just want like plain chocolate. But then plain chocolate, like plain dairy milk is too boring. So I have to add like nuts and fruit in it.
But what about dairy milk whole nut? That's elite. That's elite choice right
I
there.
prefer the raisins
No, that's crazy.
in it as
That is
well. It's
crazy.
chewy.
Anyway, I could argue with you about this all day, but let's get back to the episode before we argue about fruit and nut all day. Anyway, as I was saying, the food chain for humans would obviously be one of the first obvious things to be affected. But there is also a much more disgusting consequence that I think people do not think about nearly enough, which is that without insects, the world would literally start filling up with dead stuff.
Wait, what do you mean filling up with dead stuff?
No, literally, exactly that. Like, one of the reasons dead animals don't just sit around for ages is because, like I told you earlier, insects get to them really quickly, right? And start the process of breaking them down. And I told you earlier about blowflies being a really good example because they can
Hmm.
detect a fresh carcass incredibly fast, like sometimes within minutes under the right conditions. And they are often the first insects to arrive. Once they arrive, they lay eggs on the body, usually in moist, protected areas like the eyes, nostrils, mouth, or any open wound, because those places give larvae the best access to soft tissue and some protection from drying out. Then those eggs hatch into maggots, and maggots are basically specialized feeding machines. They do not have to waste energy on like wings or any kind of like complicated behavior. We know they look pretty simple, they are pretty simple. Their whole job is to eat dead tissue, grow really fast, and in doing that, they massively speed up the breakdown of a dead body. And I know that is revolting to think about, but it's also one of the reasons nutrients that are locked up in a carcass don't just stay there. They actually get moved back into the ecosystem. And maggots are actually such efficient dead tissue removers that we have used them in medicine. Now, there is a real clinical treatment called maggot debridement therapy, where sterile fly larvae are placed on chronic wounds because they selectively remove dead or dying tissue and help clean the wound bed. So, as disgusting as people find them, mostly me, maggots are not just symbols of decay, but they're actually biologically very good at getting rid of tissue that needs to go. And in nature, that same basic process is happening on carcasses, on, like, for example, a dead fox, a dead pigeon, or just like roadkill. Those larvae really help strip down the soft tissue far faster than you would get from microbes and weather alone. And blowflies are not the only insects involved either. Burying beetles are another amazing example. So instead of just turning up and feeding, they actually find small vertebrate carcasses like a dead mouse or small bird, bury them underground. They can even like strip away fur or feathers and shape the carcass into a kind of food resource for their young and then raise their larvae on it. Now, it is important to say that if all insects disappeared, it wouldn't be that they just stopped decomposing completely, because bacteria and fungi would still be breaking dead tissue down and scavengers would still feed on carcasses. Air, moisture, temperature, and microbes would all still matter, but it would be a slower, messier, and much more visible, especially for bodies left out in the open. So insects are part of what makes decomposition move quickly from fresh death into dispersal and recycling. So without them, carcasses would persist for longer and soft tissue would remain in the environment for longer.
That is actually so gross, but I can understand why it's necessary, and I've definitely like seen it in practice or like
Oh.
documentaries, like, you know, like true
Yeah.
crime and stuff, like
Yeah.
that gross
Oh God, yeah,
aspects
I've
of
heard
it.
like some awful like true crime stories. Yeah, which we're not going to go
Yeah,
into. There's not the right
yeah.
podcast for that.
But obviously, if we were like humans, they're like problem solvers. So, is this like a problem that humans could ever actually fix? Like, if insects disappeared, could we make robot bees or like something to engineer our way around it?
That is, I guess, like that's a really good question. It's exactly the question that people always ask when we think about this topic. And in very small, specific situations, we actually can to an extent, because hand pollination is already used in commercial agriculture for some crops, including like economically important ones like apple, oil palm, and cacao. And a 2021 paper actually makes the point that it can actually also improve fruit set and also fruit quality. But the same paper is also very clear about the downside, because it is very labor intensive, it's very expensive, and also skill dependent. And it's not something you can casually scale across entire landscapes without major costs and trade off. And we already relied on managed systems in some controlled environments, because greenhouse agriculture is a really great example of that. So, in commercial tomato glass houses, growers often use managed bumblebee colonies because tomatoes need vibration or buzz pollination to actually release pollen efficiently. And there's actually a current 𝘾𝘂𝗃𝗃 funded project which is working with commercial glass houses at Planet Earth to optimize tomato pollination by using AI and sensor technology to monitor colony performance and floral visitation. So this isn't just hypothetical, it's actually something that we're already doing. And also, people have already built robot pollinators. Now, these are like, because people always say, like, could we just make like robot bees, for example? We have already made robot pollinators. So there are experimental systems for greenhouse tomatoes and orchid crops that use cameras, robotic arms, vibration, or sprayed pollen suspensions to target flowers. And I'm pretty sure when I was working at Essex, they actually did something similar to this. Like they had like some robot pollinators or something
Oh.
like that. So it's really interesting. But the same problems with these kind of technologies comes up again and again, because these systems are promising in like a lab setting or a tightly controlled setting, but they are still technically complex. And so when you go to put them out in like the real world, for example, they just basically become like too expensive. And yeah, it's really easy basically to like use a robot pollinator to pollinate like a few plants in your lab, but the minute you tried to do that across like the whole planet, you just couldn't do it basically.
Yeah, there was a Black Mirror episode on that where they replaced, or like the bees had gone extinct, and then they made robot bees, and basically, I'm pretty sure it was Black Mirror, and basically the robot bees were like hijacked by like terrorist organization. So it's
I
like
think I
that's a whole
vaguely
nother
remember this.
aspect. Huh?
I think I vaguely remember this. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's like a whole nother aspect that you wouldn't even really consider. You can't like hijack actual bees, right?
What did they
But I
get them to
guess
do
like
though? Like in the episode, what did the bees do? I can't remember.
I can't remember. I think it was like targeted murder or something.
And then they just like what they yeah, okay. So what the robot bees ended up like killing people.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh, okay.
because they were like
The robot bees.
computer hijacked by like a terrorist organization, but because they're
Okay.
like literal flying drones across the whole world, I don't know. I guess that's just like a fun Black Mirror episode, but
Something to think about. If we make robot bees,
something to think
make sure they can't
about.
be hacked.
But thank you
Mhm.
so much for that, Liv. That was honestly so interesting, and I feel like not only have we enlightened our listeners on like the use or the purpose of insects, but we've also learned that I'm fucking weird when it comes to insects as well, and have a lot of weird
Load of weird
insect stories.
stories. A
But
hundred
obviously,
percent.
if you're listening and you're like, bro, like I'm the same, like I've got a funny insect story, let us know because it will make me
Yeah,
feel less weird.
100%.
Okay, with that, let's get on to our laboratory of the episode. And we are delving back into peer review that take, where we basically peer review your hottest or most unhinged take. Let's just get straight into it.
This episode is sponsored by Cite, the smart citation tool for your everyday research needs. Taz, I don't know about you, but However, I think Cite really sets itself apart from other citation and reference tools.
Yeah, I feel the same with a site. Not only do you have access to over 250 million papers, but it can summarize a paper into a report, format citations, and more.
Yeah, and not only that, but I also love that you can connect it to tools like ChatGPT, Claude, or Copilot, and it basically just upgrades how those tools actually handle research.
Yeah, so instead of getting a general answer, your AI is actually searching through a huge database of research papers. And the key thing is it's not just looking at the titles or abstracts, it's searching inside the full text.
Honestly, it's such a slay because it just makes such a big difference, because a lot of important details don't really show up in abstracts, and I feel like most tools just miss that completely.
On top of that is the smart citations feature, which I think is one of the most useful features because it doesn't just show how many times a paper's been cited, it also shows how it's been cited.
Yeah, you can see whether other researchers have supported the findings, contradicted them, or whether they've just mentioned them. So it gives you a much clearer picture of what other experts in the field feel about it.
It also helps with access. So if a paper is available to you, Cite will help you get the full text.
So if you want to try it, you can head to cite.ai, or you can find the link in today's episode or video description. Setup only takes a minute, and you can use the code on screen now for money off. And thank you so much to Cite for sponsoring today's episode. But for now, let's get back into it. But I'm worth it, 'cause I'll slip into your dreams tonight.
Okay, so we already have covered what peer review this take is, but basically peer review this take is a very new laboratory section that we've introduced for this season. And basically you guys give us your hottest takes or your most unhinged takes. We determine whether we give it a minor revisions, a major revisions, or we just fully give it a rejection. Or if in the really rare occasion, we may just fully 100% agree with your take, which I really doubt that's going to happen. And we will accept it into our journal of the So Cultured podcast. So I'm going to start off with our very first hot take. It starts with, I need to say this because no one in my lab will admit it, but lab freezers are just organized chaos. Everyone acts like there's a system, boxes, labels, some kind of inventory, but the second you actually try and find something, you can't. You're digging through layers of mystery samples, half the labels are faded, or it's just someone's initials, and there's always boxes that no one claims, but no one will throw out. Also, why does everything have to be kept forever? People leave and their samples just become part of the freezer ecosystem. So my hot take is that no one actually knows what's in lab freezers.
Oh my God, this is interesting, right? Because I don't even work in labs, but I remember my old supervisor was literally telling me about how he was like clearing some stuff out of the freezer. And I was like, hon, you have not been in the lab for like years. I was like thinking in my head, what do you mean? And I remember saying to him, like, literally, what have you got in there? Because like you haven't done any lab work. I've been pretty much in your lab group for like the last like 7-8 years, and like I've never seen you in the lab, and nobody in the lab has ever done any lab work. So what have you got in there? He was like, oh, I've got like some mouse samples in there. They've just been in there for like 20 years or something. I was like, oh my God, how have they not been chucked out? How?
Yeah, honestly, it's actually such a common theme wherever I've gone with labs, is that like some places will have like a really solid inventory, but usually because it's like a controlled thing, like viruses, you have to have like a really controlled inventory because like obviously it's dangerous if like they're not accounted for and like vials of viruses are not accounted for or whatever. But if we're not talking viruses and we're talking like just general lab stuff, God knows what's in those lab freezers. Like the amount of times, do you know what exposes this the most is when a lab freezer just suddenly stops working and like the temperature like slowly creeps up. Everyone is like scrambling around trying to find a place for like all the boxes, and then you're literally going through them like, what even is all of this stuff? So yeah, but then it's so hard because like I've been in situations where we've like almost thrown something out and then we haven't because I don't know, like our subconscious is telling us, like,
Don't do
just
it.
just put it in the freezer for now. And thank goodness we did, because honestly, the randomest like person in the lab, or like someone who worked here like 5 years ago, starts
Like my
inquiring
supervisor.
about specific samples, and you're
Yeah.
literally like, bro, you haven't worked here for like 2 years, or like you haven't worked in this
But
same
this is what
department. You
confuses
might
me,
be in
because
the
I'm
same
like,
uni.
if it's that important, why
Yeah,
was you just leaving it in there for like 20 years?
I don't know. It's
Just banking
crazy,
on
isn't
people
it?
not chucking them out. I
Yeah.
I couldn't survive in the lab because, like, when I went to my new office at Essex, as soon as I got in there, like day one, I was like, right, we need to clear out of this office, and I was relentless. I was chucking away shit. I was like, look, if you've left it in the corner of the office for like 5 years, I'm getting rid of it. Like, I'm not sitting in all of your mess
Yeah.
because you're unorganized. Like, I'm getting rid of it. So yeah, lab freezers wouldn't be safe around me, let me tell you that. So it's a good job I'm not there. But for the pure reason that my old supervisor left some stuff, I'm going to straight up accept. Straight up
Yeah.
accept.
I'm
Even
actually
after we
going to
just
go
said, are we
straight
going
up
to fully
accept.
accept? And the first one, we're like, yep, accepted. Get it in the journal.
Yeah, straight up.
Get
Straight
it in the
up, I
journal, front page.
agree.
All right, moving on to the next hot take, because this one is very interesting. This one says, I think a lot of people go to grad school not because they have a clear plan, but because they don't know who they are without achievement. If you've spent your whole life being praised for being smart, hardworking, and successful, it's easy to just keep chasing the next qualification instead of actually stopping to ask what you want. For some people, grad school is less about passion and more about staying in an environment where overworking yourself gets rewarded and your worth still feels
Uh,
measurable. That's deep. Uh, that is deep.
that is
My
really
immediate
deep.
thought is minor revisions, because I kind of get where they're coming from. Like, low key, I feel like that's what contributes to toxicity in academia, right? Is because most people actually are like that. Like, they genuinely do
Hmm.
measure their whole worth off of like their academic life and academic validation. But also, I do think a lot of people just go into a PhD not because they want the academic validation, but just because they don't know what they're doing next. They're like, fuck it, I'll
Hmm.
just do a PhD. That was me. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing
Same.
next. Let me just do another degree.
No, literally, when you were reading that out, I was like, I
Say about us.
think I might have written this in, because this is literally me. Um, but yeah, I agree. I think minor revisions as well, because there are obviously people out there who are very, very passionate about science. Not saying we aren't, because we are, but they're very passionate about science. They're very passionate about research specifically, and so they have a very clear picture of what they want to do. But I actually think the fact that I wasn't really sure what to do is more of a reflection of like my background, and not really having the access to knowledge about what you can do with science, because both my
Yeah,
parents didn't go to
true.
uni, and like I knew I was really passionate about science, but I had no idea like what careers
No
you can
idea.
do in science. And
Yeah.
like, it's even after I finished undergrad, I still didn't really have
Mate, even after doing your
any
PhD,
idea.
I was like, what do I do now? There's no
Yeah,
degree left
like
to
it is
get.
really hard to navigate. I think I was like midway through PhD, and I was just like, what am I actually going to do next?
Yeah,
So
100%.
yeah, and also I was doing job searches, and it was all like desirable if you had a PhD, and I was like, well, I guess I'm doing that then.
Yes, I'm doing
So
that. And then we sit there in
yeah,
the
minor
PhD interview and we're
revisions.
like, oh, I've always wanted to be a doctor. It's been a lifelong dream of mine. I
I'm
love
so
this research
interested in this
area. And I'm like,
research project.
nah, just CBA to get a job, hun.
Yeah, but hey,
All
maybe a
right,
job would have been
minor
easier.
revisions.
Minor
Minor
revisions.
revisions.
Okay, the next one says peer review my take cell culture media. If it doesn't look contaminated, I'm using it. I'm sorry, but I'm not throwing out perfectly good media just because it's been sitting there a bit longer than ideal. If it's still clear, no weird floaty bits, no color change, what exactly is the issue? People can be so dramatic with contamination. Oh, girl, sassy.
I,
But low key, minor revisions.
oh, really?
Yeah, I think I'm that scientist, to be fair. I'm very much like, I think if you've been working in like a sterile or aseptic, you've been using your aseptic techniques and you've been working as sterile as possible. I'm low key a bit like, if there's no weird floaty bits, it's probably fine. So, and it's never really failed me, to be honest. And like, I think there has been an occasion where my cells have been infected by like a fungus and I'll just get new media. So I don't think it's that deep, and it also means that you're not like wasting supposedly perfectly good media. But obviously, the downside to that is you could contaminate your cells. So I don't know. There's a
I
negative
mean,
to it.
I don't know much about cell culture media, so I can't really comment. But all I can say is, sometimes risks are there to be taken, and it sounds like they're just taking taking a risk. So I'm just going to go with whatever Taz says here because I don't really understand cell culture media and contamination. So Taz, what are we going with?
We're going with minor revisions because it's the trade off between like
Okay.
using perfectly good media versus media that might be contaminated, but like it'll be fine basically.
She's a risk taker. I like
I'm a
that.
risk taker. Yeah.
I love that. Well, our next hot take says a lot of independence in a PhD just means no one is actually supervising you properly. They've
I feel like all of these hot takes have been good and that I low
all
key
been
agree
good
with
this
them.
episode. Like, I can't lie, I'm agreeing with this.
Yeah, they're not really hot takes. They're like, and they're not really like controversial. They're like, yeah, I actually
Straight
kind of
up.
agree.
Minor revisions. We've not even rejected one of them because I'm not rejecting this because absolutely, like 100%.
100%. I have no notes, to be honest.
I mean, obviously, like the whole point of a PhD is to be independent, but I agree that there are some PhDs where I think, Han, you're not independent. You are, yeah, literally this, like you're literally actually just getting no supervision whatsoever, and like you have no idea what's going on. So like, there's a fine line between a good level of independence versus like, yeah, you're literally getting no help and
Just
like you're
doing it
just
on your own.
winging it all by yourself, just hoping that it's all going to work out. But because like I've seen some people, yeah, like when I was, well, I'm not going to say where I was working, but I've seen some people, they get to year 3 and they fail their Viva. I'm sorry, but I think if you get to the point where you're doing your Viva and you fail it, to the point of like major revisions, go away for like 6 months to a year and come back is like insane. And I don't mean that like in a negative way towards like the student. I mean that in a negative way towards the supervisor because how the hell is your student at that point? And can you imagine getting to your Viva and failing? Yeah.
But on the flip side to that, I've also seen like students almost failing their Viva because their PhD supervisor basically just did everything for them, and
Okay, yeah.
the PhD student had literally zero grasp on their own PhD. So then when it came to the Viva, they had no idea like how to answer the questions. And you know what's wild is in Australia at like specific unis, they don't even have like the Viva is not a thing. They just don't have a defense. They just
No
get
defense.
like, yeah, they just get comments back on their thesis and they just have to amend them and that's it.
Oh, that's the
And I
dream
was
because I'm
like,
going to
that
be
needs to
so
change
nervous.
immediately because how is that fair on the UK and US people and probably
Well,
the rest of the world, actually?
I do think you should absolutely have to defend your PhD. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's something that you're gonna it's literally the most nerve-wracking thing I think I've done in my life, like genuinely, but like you absolutely should have to
So
do that to get like
validating.
the
Yeah.
highest degree in the world. Like there should probably be some system there where like you actually have to go
Hmm.
and sit face to face with two other experts in your field and answer questions with like no way of
Hmm.
googling, no chat gpt, no Claude going on in here. Do you know what I mean? Like we're going to need to be able
Mm.
to answer these questions. But this is what I do
Yeah.
think about like with like AI, Claude, ChatGPT. I'm like, I genuinely, I know we've said this before, but I'm very happy I didn't have this during my PhD because I think I would have overused that shit. And I would have got to my
Mm.
Viva and I would have been like, I don't know anything.
Yeah. I think that's the problem. Like, there is over reliance on AI these days and it's making us more dumb. So,
100%. So I'm straight
That's
up
my hot take,
accepting.
everybody.
We're getting all of these in the journal, all of these takes on today. Listen, guys, do you have anything that you think is actually a hot take? We want you to give us something that you think that we're actually possibly going to disagree with. So if you guys want to submit your hot takes for peer review this take, then you guys can DM us on Instagram or TikTok at soculturedpodcast, or you can actually just head over to our website and you can use our laboratory form to submit your hot take if you want. And with that, that rounds up episode 4 of What If season 8. But we will see you guys in next week's episode. Bye, everyone.